Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Politics. I'm Kayode Okikiolu. On the news this hour, People's Democratic Party sets reconciliation machinery in motion to reunite warring factions ahead of 2023 elections. In spite of President Muhammadu Buhari's economic recovery plan, the World Bank is sending a yellow alert of Nigeria being on the brink of sinking deeper into poverty. Now, what's the economic recovery plan? And find out on the show. And with President Muhammadu Buhari firing a warning shot to insurgents, the Chief of Army Staff is asking Nigerian soldiers to be more responsive and dedicated to the national cause of protecting the nation's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Welcome everyone to the program. Now we begin this noon bulletin with the People's Democratic Party's mandate to the Delta State Governor Dr. Ifeanyi Okowa to reconcile River State Governor Nyesom Wike and his Bayelsa State counterpart Seriake Dickson, who have been locked in a bitter battle, partly over the ownership of the Soko oil wells. The chairman of the party's board of trustees, Senator Walid Jibrin, also said the board had set up a committee of BOT members to intervene in the face-off between the two governors, and they're working towards presenting a consensual presidential candidate in the next election. According to the party, the Delta State governor, whom both governors respect, had been asked to mediate in their feud. The chairman of the party added that as a first line of success in the mediation, both governors had been asked to avoid further media comments on the crisis. Now here's what Prince Uche II said. He says, "We recognize how sensitive this issue is to both governors, but as a party, we will not sit back and allow them to continue like that. There must be control." The PDP has therefore asked Governor Ifeanyi Okowa of Delta State, whom both Governor Wike and Governor Dickson have respect for, to intervene. He has met the two governors, and there is progress. The two governors are from the PDP, and we as a party will ensure peace, as quarrel between them will not augur peace for PDP. Well, let's move on to economic issues now. The poverty rate in Nigeria could become worse, with up to 30 million more people falling into the extreme poverty trap in the next 10 years. But that's unless federal government policy reforms bring about robust productivity and inclusive growth. Well, the World Bank disclosed this in its latest Nigeria economic update, which was obtained from its website. According to the institution's lead economist for Nigeria, Marco Hernandez, Nigeria's population is expected to grow by as much as 35 million in the next decade. And unless the pace of growth and job creation accelerates, the country will account for a quarter of all people living in extreme poverty worldwide. So, goes on to say, without robust productivity growth, the country actually could deteriorate, and the number of people living in poverty will continue to rise. Now, the report goes on to say Nigeria could enable millions of citizens escape poverty over the next decade through enacting bold reforms designed to boost economic productivity. So let's take a look at the World Bank's recommendations first and show you what the World Bank is asking Nigeria to do in order to avert this looming crisis. On one hand, the World Bank is advising the country to leverage trade integration to harness the benefits of Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Also goes on to ask the country to improve basic education financing to improve human capital outcome. Another recommendation from the World Bank is that the country monitor the impact of conflict on the welfare of households to protect poor and vulnerable people. And lastly, leverage digital technologies to diversify the economy and create jobs for young workers. So there we have it. Let's put the World Bank's prediction about Nigeria into perspective. And we're being joined this afternoon by the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Muda Yusuf, who joins us live in our studio to discuss this report, what it means to Nigeria, and perhaps how we can reverse this. Good afternoon, and thank you for
Good
joining us on
afternoon.
the program.
Yeah.
Now, what we're seeing, about 30 more million people being added to this poverty bracket. As it stands, about 100 million Nigerians live below that $2 bracket, which is about 700 naira on a daily basis. Now, if 30 million more people are added to this, this means that Nigeria will be home to about 25% of the poorest people in the world. Let me begin by asking, seeing these figures, how does it resonate with you?
Well, it's a very frightening scenario, and already we are beginning to see the implications and consequences of increasing poverty. We have seen how this has led to, of course, security problems around the country. We have seen the situation with unemployment. We have seen all sorts of social problems around the country. So if the situation continues, it could actually degenerate to something much worse than what we have now. And the good thing about this report is the emphasis on productivity and economic inclusion. Whatever policies the government is putting in place, these two planks are very critical. Because if you look at some clear indicators of the poverty situation as we speak, you look at issues like access to food. How easy is it for Nigerians to feed? These are very basic things. What is the situation with access to health care? As we speak, almost 80% or so of health care provision in Nigeria is provided by the private sector. And how many Nigerians can afford this health care? Look at access to education. The level
of insurance, the
yes, the issue of insurance, the penetration is still very low. Look at the issue of education. Education has become more or less a cash and carry thing, even though it's supposed to be something basic that governments should provide. Access to education now for the poor is very, very difficult. The same thing with housing and so on. So we need to look at these things in a much more fundamental way. And some of the things we need to do, because when you talk about poverty, you need growth to drive the economy out of poverty or to move people out of poverty. And you need investment to generate the growth. Two ways you generate the investment. You generate investment from the private sector. You also generate investment from the public sector.
Right.
So investment in those two key areas, looking at variables that will impact on private investment and on public investment are very key to getting the country out of poverty. The president has said he wants to move 10 million people out of poverty
yearly.
Yeah. That's a tall order.
Mr. Yusuf, now you have mentioned some key players. You've mentioned the private sector, the public sector. I'd like us to, leave here understanding who should do what.
Yeah.
Because it's important to know whose responsibility is to do this. So we have the government, the public sector, as it were. We have the private sector. We have Nigerians also. So as a matter of harming people with what they need to do moving on, who should do what? What should the government be doing? What should the private sector be doing? What should Nigerians be doing also in ensuring that we don't fall into this trap?
Well, first let me say that the responsibility of dealing with these issues is not just a federal issue. The state governments have a role to play. The local governments have a role to play. And as citizens over the years, we often focus on the federal. There is not much in terms of accountability at the states and local government level. So we need to engage more at those two levels to see what those two levels of government can bring to the table in terms of impacting on poverty. Now, as to what the private sector should bring to the table, when you talk about job creation is the primary responsibility of the private sector. But you need to create the environment for the jobs to be created.
Which goes back to the government.
It goes back to the government. And some of these things are not necessarily things that even require putting money on the table. Some of them are issues of regulation, for instance. You could have a regulatory environment that is so hostile that makes it difficult for businesses to function. You could have a policy environment that makes it so difficult for businesses to function.
Is that what we have right now?
Of course, we have quite a lot of that. I mean, we have issues with sometimes trade policies. We have issues sometimes with monetary policy. We have issues sometimes with our foreign exchange policy. We have issues sometimes with even our investment policy.
You know, you mentioned MPR, just pardon me now.
Yeah.
As we have it right now, do you think it is sustainable? The monetary policy rate?
Well, not exactly monetary policy rate. We are looking at the totality of the monetary policy framework as a totality and the impact it will bring to the economy.
Specifically the MPR. What is your take on that?
No, the MPR is okay the way it is. I mean, it's not something significant. And if you look at even the totality of the impact of MPR on the economy, it's not as if it is that significant. What is more important from the monetary policy or monetary authority point of view is to ensure effective financial intermediation between the banking system and the investing community. Already, the CBN is taking some steps to correct that. What we are seeing over time is a kind of breakdown or collapse of financial intermediation, where the bulk of the funds in the financial system or in the banking system are not going to lending,
right,
but they are going to purchase of treasury bills and all of that. So that is beginning to change now with some of the steps being taken by the CBN, looking at the treasury bill rate, the bond rate, excluding some people and institutions from investing in treasury bills, looking at some of the fees, because we discovered that the bulk of the revenue of some of these banks are not coming from interest. They are coming from fees, charges, and all of this. All these things don't impact directly on the economy.
I would like you to touch on something just before we round off this segment. And, you know, looking at that report, the World Bank identifies two major issues as a comparative advantage. It talks about the large population of young people in the country, just about 50%, and the vast natural resources we have. How do we make this to meet at a point such that it begins to work for us? Because so far it seems like there are dormant resources we have as a country. Well,
it will be a resource if there's an investment in it. Population is not just about the number, it's also about the quality.
That's human capital development.
Human capital. It is where you make population become human capital. That is when it becomes a resource. That is when it can impact. And unfortunately, the quality of spending, the amount of spending in terms of human capital development, whether at the state level, federal level, or local government, is still very low. We look at the structure of our budgets, whether at the federal or state or local government, you look at the structure, you see that what is being deployed to education is not that significant compared to the need to build human capital. So in order to get the right kind of value from the population, the quality of the population matters, and it requires investment.
I'd like you to do a yes or no for me. Is this projection, is it inevitable?
It is, if we do the right things.
Right. So at least there's a prospect for...
Of course, if we do the right things, if we engage the stakeholder, because for you to get the right kind of quality policy, you must engage stakeholders.
Okay. I'd like to thank you so much, Mr. Muda Yusuf. I mean, you have shed so much light on this. He's the DG of Lagos State Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
This afternoon.
It's a pleasure. Yeah.